I imagine people might filter in, but I just wanted to give a little bit of background for this set of presentations, which are near and dear to my heart because they're all sort of internal Notre Dame and to some extent CPI research projects. So you'll be hearing first from Father Stephen Koeth, who's one of our faculty co-directors, a historian here, then from some colleagues elsewhere on campus, and then I'll be kind of presenting on behalf of a larger collaboration as well. So everything you're gonna hear in this hour is pretty in its early stages. A lot of work has gone in, but these aren't final finished pieces, so we hope that there's, to get some conversation going as well. So just wanted to add a little context. Thanks for kind of stepping into the CPI Research HQ with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Maddie, and thanks everybody for being here. My apologies in advance. I have to teach right after this, so I'm going to present and dash. It's not because I don't want to hear the other presenters, but I have 28 undergraduates awaiting me. As Maddie mentioned, this panel was framed as an update on some of the research projects being conducted by various scholars and groups associated with the Church Properties Initiative. So I framed my presentation this afternoon as a preview of a new book project that I've just begun and how I'm envisioning things will take shape over the coming years. And I'm going to give particular emphasis to just one slice of that story that I began researching this summer in St. Louis. Briefly, the story really begins with my first book, which some of you may recall I presented from in previous conferences. Is on the effects of post-war suburbanization on American Catholicism, especially the way that suburbanization changed definitions of parish and community, the relationship between clergy and laity, various aspects of Catholic education and faith formation, and Catholic politics as well. I'm pleased to say that book will be available for purchase as Crabgrass Catholicism from the University of Chicago Press this fall, just in time for Christmas shopping. While researching in Catholic and municipal archives in metropolitan New York, I discovered numerous instances in which the bishops, priests, and heads of lay associations in that area communicated with developers and urban planners, including Robert Moses, both to promote the expansion of suburban housing developments and to plan for the church's institutional expansion into suburbia to provide services for suburbanizing Catholics. But I also uncovered many more instances from the start of the New Deal through at least the 1960s in which these very same leaders, while they're pushing suburban development and trying to plan for it, are also in communication with urban planners to advocate for the expansion of public housing projects. And then in the decades since, the 1970s, 80s, and on, also advocating for affordable, low-income, or supportive housing. I think it's fair to say that typically when urban historians today tell stories of public and affordable housing, they do so on the level of individual cities or even on the level of individual public housing complexes. There have been a rare few studies that have attempted to tell a truly national story about the history of public and affordable housing. And despite the crucial role that I would argue religious actors have played in that history, they're almost entirely absent from such histories, or they're referenced as singular, isolated examples of housing activism. So I'm in the early stages, as I say, of a new book project exploring more deeply the role that American Catholics and their ecumenical religious partners have played in the planning and building, inhabiting and abandoning, raising and reimagining of public and affordable housing from the New Deal to today. My hope is that this project will prove a novel insertion of religious actors into post-war urban and political history and will help scholars in these fields to have a fuller understanding of a crucial aspect of American history in the 20th century. I'm currently envisioning a book tentatively titled Unless the Lord Build the House, A Religious History of Public Housing in the United States, that would be divided into 3 sections, exploring what loosely might be described as the birth, death, and resurrection of public and supportive housing. Chapters in the first section will detail the role that religious leaders and institutions on the national and local levels played in advocating for the creation and expansion of public housing complexes in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. As early as the 1930s, the U.S. Catholic bishops became staunch advocates for public housing, especially through the work of Msgr. John O'Grady, who founded the first National Public Housing Conference in 1931. Bishops and priests and lay leaders in cities across the country, from Thomas O'Dwyer in Los Angeles, Father Thomas Tobin in Portland, Oregon, Father Stephen Panic in Bridgeport, Connecticut, all lobbied for the construction of more public housing, and social theorists like Monsignor Jack Egan of Chicago continued to promote public housing on the national level. Often they did so because members of their own white, working-class, ethnic parishes would become the first residents of such projects. Indeed, my own interest in the topic stems in part from the fact that my grandparents raised my father and his siblings in public housing on Staten Island, New York, in the 1950s and 60s. The names of these public housing complexes, including Cabrini Green in Chicago, named, of course, for the Mother Frances Cabrini, the first canonized U.S. citizen. The Archbishop Thomas J. Walsh Homes in Newark, New Jersey, named for the city's first archbishop. The Father Stephen Panic Village in Bridgeport, Connecticut, named for that city's founding chairman of the Housing Authority of Bridgeport. And the Cornelius Drew Homes in Harlem, named for the longtime pastor of St. Charles Borromeo Parish. Even these names of complexes that I knew growing up, and you all probably recognize some of at least, testified to the enduring role that religious leaders played in the expansion of public housing in that era. The second section of this envisioned book would explore how pastors and parishioners, lay activists, worked to build community within these public housing complexes and to serve public housing residents even amidst the decline of public housing facilities and the rise of crime in such projects in the late 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The vast majority of white ethnic tenants who pioneered public housing viewed public housing as a temporary arrangement, which bought them time to save up for a suburban home of their dreams. As these white working-class residents moved to the suburbs, public housing complexes were increasingly inhabited by poorer black tenants. And yet, even amidst white flight, a burgeoning urban crisis, the collapse of funding and of public housing facilities into disrepair and crime, Catholic dioceses, parishes, and religious orders invested significant resources, both financial and personal, in urban parishes and schools that served the inner city. Activist priests, sisters, seminarians, and lay faithful spearheaded ecumenical efforts among public housing residents and across the urban and suburban divide to form community, clean up properties, provide recreation for children, press city and housing officials for improved living conditions and services. So the specific example that I'd like to explore in slightly greater detail, and which provided the title for my presentation today, comes from St. Louis, from the city's infamous Pruitt-Igoe housing complex, and from the parish of St. Bridget, right there amidst the housing project, where Monsignor John Schocklee served as pastor in the 1950s and 60s. St. Bridget's was founded in 1857 to serve St. Louis's Irish immigrants who had fled Ireland's Great Hunger and expanded the city's so-called Kerry Patch, an area just north of downtown and then expanding to the west. The parish established the nation's third St. Vincent de Paul Society in 1863, and in 1871, 2 parish schools, one for boys and one for girls, were opened under the direction of the Christian Brothers and the Sisters of St. Joseph. In the 1930s, a housing study by the city of St. Louis found that the Kerry Patch area had both the highest percentage of outhouses still of any neighborhood in the city, and that the area's death rate was significantly higher than the rest of the city. Such slum conditions prevailed through the Great Depression and the Second World War, and then in the 1940s, slum removal plans were set in motion. The neighborhood was cleared for development of public housing. Minoru Yamasaki, the architect who later designed the New York's World Trade Center, designed 33 11-story high-rise buildings for what would become the Pruitt-Igoe Public Housing Project. was named in honor of Wendell Pruitt, an African-American Navy pilot in World War II, and William Igoe, a former US congressman. The complex sprawled over 58 acres and was designed to house 10,000 residents in 5,800 units. Construction began in 1952. The first residents moved in 1954, the same year the US Supreme Court decided Brown v. Board of Education. And the project reached its maximum residency capacity, or residency rate, at 91% capacity in 1957. The building of Pruitt-Igoe transformed St. Bridget's both in terms of demographics and real estate, though I'm finding so far that it had significantly less impact on that church there, which is St. Stanislaus Kostka Parish, a Polish Catholic community that whereas St. Bridget's became very involved in servicing the residents of Pruitt-Igoe, there's not much evidence that I found yet that St. Stanislaus Kostka did as much. They seem to be much more focused, I think, on maintaining their own language and culture against assimilation, to the point where in a much later day, in fact in the 2000s, St. Stanislaus Kostka Parish withdrew from the Archdiocese and from a connection to the Roman Catholic Church and became an independent Catholic church. To prepare for the building of the Pruitt-Igoe projects, the city of St. Louis widened Jefferson Avenue, which forced St. Bridget's Parish to sell the school and convent that had been on the west side of that street. The parish rectory, which had been just north of the church, was then razed to make way for a new parish school, a new rectory, and a new convent. Here we see the dedication or the digging of, or the kind of start of the digging for the new school with the Pruitt-Igoe complex already in the back. And here, the opening of the new school with the public housing complex behind it. A new parish, school, a new rectory, a new convent, all built by Monsignor Aloysius Marshner, the pastor of St. Bridget's from 1954 to 1961. And this story is repeated in parishes throughout this area of St. Louis, where numerous other public housing complexes were built prior and after Pruitt-Igoe. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment in the downtown, in the areas surrounding these public housing complexes, even as the traditionally Catholic communities of Irish and German and Polish Catholics are leaving for the suburbs. So it represented a significant commitment to the inner city, to the urban poor, to the black residents of St. Louis, something that the Archdiocese attempted to kind of point out and hold up as proof of solidarity during the civil rights movement and some of the kind of more tense moments of kind of black accusation against white St. Louis residents for a lack of attention to their plight. The flight of many white residents from the area dramatically decreased St. Bridget's roster, but the overall population of the area skyrocketed. Many of Pruitt-Igoe's initial residents, or the new residents, the majority of whom were black Americans, considered the buildings the best housing they had ever had when they moved in. The project won design awards from the American Institute of Architects. But others decried the inhumane, described as inhumane, the warehousing of people in high-rise towers. The building's design flaws, including a lack of playgrounds for children, the lack of restrooms on the ground floors of the building, and the fact that the elevators were designed to stop only on every other floor. All of these conditions, along with the poverty of residents, quickly became apparent. Monsignor John Schocklee was named pastor in 1961, and he waged what many called a one-man war on poverty. One of the first projects that he established was named Project St. Bridget, involving bringing busloads of nuns into the projects to do door-to-door outreach in the towers. Many of these same sisters would later join Monsignor Schocklee in attending the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's 1965 March on Selma. Schocklee also founded the Bicentennial Corporation in 1964, an ecumenical, multiracial, and metropolitan organization. This Bicentennial Corporation oversaw some 21 anti-poverty programs, including a preschool, a Big Brothers Big Sisters program, a Meals on Wheels program, a parish credit union, and block partnerships between inner-city neighborhoods and suburban churches. The Bicentennial Corporation assisted some 5,000 residents of St. Louis's North Side in obtaining a GED through its voluntary improvement program. Schocklee's associate pastor at the time, Father Joseph Kohler, who served from 1962 to 1966, helped establish what he called Chocolate House and Gasthaus. The Chocolate House was a place where students could find a place to study after school. It was staffed by sisters who also served as tutors. And the Gasthaus was a private club for residents of the neighborhood, safe place to gather. Kohler also worked in conjunction with the Monsignor Butler Center, a gym, pool, and recreation room and social service center housed at the neighboring St. Leo's Parish on Melanphy Street. That parish was consolidated with St. Bridget's by the Archdiocese in 1963. But the crown jewel of the Bicentennial Corporation and of Schocklee and Kohler's War on Poverty was its civic improvement program. This housing cooperative purchased and rehabilitated row houses in the shadow of Pruitt-Igoe to sell at low cost to low-income homeowners who were being driven from the public housing complex because they earned just above the maximum income for residents of what had become welfare housing. By 1968, this highly successful program had become a model for housing charities around the nation and had inspired a revision of Section 221H of the National Housing Act of 1966, which created and expanded federal support for nonprofits rehabilitating housing for sale to low-income families. One of the things I have begun to research but have not yet found details about is exactly how this was structured in terms of a nonprofit charity. Was it run by the parish, run by the Archdiocese? There's plenty of indication that funding, significant funding, came from both the parish and the Archdiocese, but who owned the homes before they were rehabilitated, or while they were being rehabilitated and before they were sold to low-income families. I'm still sorting that out. So whether or not it's really, technically speaking, church real estate or not, I'm not sure, but certainly kind of connected to a lot of the themes that we're talking about today, yesterday and today. After hitting a peak of 91% capacity in 1957, the Pruitt-Igoe projects had a vacancy rate of 33% in 1965, and that rose to 60% in the following years. By 1971, there were only 600 people scattered across 17 of the project's 33 buildings. So on March 16, 1972, just 20 years after their construction, the first towers of Pruitt-Igoe were demolished, and the remainder were torn down between 1972 and 1973. See if there we go. The implosions of the first buildings became a centerfold image for Life magazine. And from the 1970s through the 1990s, municipal housing authorities began tearing down numerous other high-rise public housing projects like Pruitt-Igoe, Chicago's Cabrini Green, et cetera. I'm hoping, however, that my book's final section will tell a kind of resurrection story about public and supportive housing in the years since. Because since the 1970s and 80s, religious charities and nonprofits, including Catholic charities, have formed public-private partnerships to support supportive, low-income, and affordable housing, and have increasingly sought ways to adapt church properties to provide supportive housing and thereby to address the national housing crisis. Let's see. There we go. In fact, even in the suburbs that I explored in my first monograph, Catholic dioceses and parish prioritized support of low-income and supportive housing and collaborated with local governments to plan and build such facilities. And this was especially true as early as the 1970s and 80s, as dioceses and parishes recognized that once vibrant parishes and schools were contracting, and they turned to adaptive reuse of church-owned buildings and properties to address the needs of low-income housing, elder care facilities, and other essential services. And I have the example of St. Anne Parish in Brentwood which turned its public school into low-income and senior housing. My hope is that, again, this new book project will therefore have powerful resonance with many of the partners of the Church Properties Initiative who are already working to address the crisis of affordable housing, one of the most pressing social justice issues of our day. My hope, too, is that church leaders, real estate professionals, and public policy makers will be able to glean from this study not only an appreciation for the rich history of religious contributions to housing solutions, but also inspiration for current and future housing projects that can serve individual families in need. Thanks very much.